I have one observation and two kind of questions. So
Okay.
one, regarding Christopher Hitchens, how you talk about the late great Christopher Hitchens, I consider him a role model of sorts when it comes to debate. You've said of his ideas before that he argues that there is no God, but I hate him. I've heard you categorize it in that way. I think that's a mischaracterization. I think his argument was there is no God, and there's so many contradictory things about the nature of God that no thinking person should believe it. Right? That's kind of what his argument was.
Well, here was my problem with Christopher. I don't think Christopher gave an argument for how reality could exist in the absence of God. I found most atheists don't have arguments for how reality could exist in the absence of God. What they have are complaints about the way God is running the universe.
Yes, and I think his argument fundamentally was the problem of evil, that the characterizations and the answers to it are insufficient to explain why the problem of evil exists, which I understand you have one, being that the moral argument suggests that there has to be a divine being in order for justice to exist, and it naturally follows in that way. But I also think that's insufficient as an argument to prove God, and we can get into that in a little bit.
Okay, well, hold on a little bit. We don't have a lot of time, so go to your main question, if you would.
So my main question, I watched you speak with a cosmic skeptic a couple days ago,
Yeah.
and one of the things that you were talking about was how could logic and thinking that developed through the evolutionary process, how can we trust those ideas? Can you briefly iterate?
Right. Cosmic skeptic is a guy by the name of O'Connor. Nice young man from London. We were in London together.
Yeah.
And this was actually a couple years ago now. They just put it on the web just a couple days ago. But yeah, Alex O'Connor's his name. And he was trying to say that we get our moral sentiments from evolution. Okay? The problem is if evolution gives us our moral sentiments, that would mean evolution gives us all of our sentiments. Everything we think. I mean, if materialism's true, then we're not really reasoning, we're just reacting. In other words, we're just moist robots. So why should we believe anything is true, including the thought that evolution gives us our thoughts? So I'm saying it's a completely self-defeating viewpoint to say that I'm a materialist and everything is made of molecules. That would mean every thought you have is the result of the laws of physics, and if every thought is the result of the laws of physics, so is the thought that you have that every thought is the result of the laws of physics. Do you see the problem?
I don't think there's any contradiction in understanding how the process of it came to be with the validity of logic.
Yeah, but there's no way to understand anything if every thought is driven by the laws of physics.
Why?
Because we're not reasoning, we're just reacting. We don't have free will, as he would say, or as many atheists would say. Christopher Hitchens would say we don't have free will, right?
I don't think determinism and the ability to have logic are mutually exclusive, and I don't understand why there's a contradiction in that.
Well, first of all, as a materialist, what are the laws of logic made of?
So they are concepts which we use to think about what is true.
Okay,
right?
but do they exist independent of human minds?
Certain phenomenon would exist. The ability to logic would not necessarily exist, but the phenomenon of nature would still act in the same way that it does if there wasn't a being to comprehend them.
I don't know if I followed you on that. Would these laws of logic exist if there were no human beings on the earth? Would the laws of logic exist?
There wouldn't be someone to actually use logic.
I'm not asking would there be anybody to think about them. I'm saying would they exist?
See, I don't think it's a good question to ask, because I think the fundamental nature of reality would remain the same, but there wouldn't be an entity to comprehend them.
Right. The laws of logic exist independent of human minds. In fact, if these laws didn't exist, there'd be no way you and I could speak to one another, because if you had your own independent laws of logic and I had my own independent laws of logic, we couldn't communicate. The laws of logic that we're using are external to us. They're grounded in God's nature, and they allow us to communicate with one another.
I think that's a misapprehension of the idea.
Why is it a misapprehension?
Well, because...
And how do we apprehend anything without the laws of logic?
So, I think logic fundamentally exists, and I think that we're able to comprehend nature through using our ability to see how a cause and effect happen.
Right, but Gregory, what I'm saying... Your name's Gregory, right? Did I get that right? Okay. What I'm saying here is, are you a materialist? Do you think everything's just made of molecules?
Probably. I'm not exactly sure. I would say probably.
Okay, if that's the case... How could you have immaterial laws of logic? How could you have justice? How could you have love? These are immaterial realities.
Require things in the material world to actually comprehend them. They're concepts, like the same way the unicorn is a concept.
Okay.
They don't actually exist in the same meaningful way that material exists, but they are useful in certain ways.
Okay, but I'm not talking about whether they're useful or not. And I'm not talking about how we know them. I'm talking about the ontological status. In other words, there's a difference between, as you know, epistemology and ontology. Epistemology is how you know something. Ontology is the study of being itself. Why do the laws of logic exist, regardless of how we know them?
So I think there were things that we developed as we observed the objective nature of the universe, right? As we...
Okay, that's epistemology. Forget epistemology. Forget how we come to know them. Why do they exist independent of us knowing them? Before there were any human beings on the earth, they existed, correct?
The nature of the world existed. So they required things that have the ability to think, to use logic. And I think logic is a tool. I don't know if
Let me just give me one more minute, okay?
Okay.
Forget about how we know them. That's not how we come to know them. My question is, why do these things exist independent of whether or not we know them?
See, I don't think it's a good categorization of the question.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
I get it. Maybe we can talk more later.
Sure, absolutely.
But things like logic, moral obligation, laws of mathematics, consciousness, these things are all independently immaterial entities that can't be explained by materialism, and they exist independent of whether human beings exist.
I truly believe that Frank was asking him if he believes that the laws of logic would exist outside of human beings, because if the laws of logic only exist inside the human mind, that means that logic would change from person to person. So the fact that they two are even having a conversation is incredible. The fact that them two are even having a conversation is because language itself only works if logic is universal, right? If logic were subjective, conversation itself would virtually be impossible. If you're a materialist, if you're somebody who thinks that everything is a result of all naturalism and all nature, the own reasoning that you have, you can't trust it. It's just a reaction to things in motion. And I would even go so far to say that if our thoughts are only controlled by naturalism or by nature, then the laws of logic itself would be controlled by the same thing. If our logic itself is a byproduct of evolution, then that would mean that the laws of logic, like math, should also evolve. Why does math stay the same? Why do we agree when we have a conversation that 1 + 1 does equal 2? I think there's enough evidence to know and to come to a common ground that the laws of logic exist independent on if we exist or not. If you can agree to that, I think it's safe to ask the question, why do those things exist? And that's what Frank was speaking on. Why does that exist? Why are the laws of logic here? Because they're immaterial. Reasoning, rationality, mathematics, physics, all these things they're not physically tangible, but they exist. And then also, why is it that we can have a conversation about those things and know that they exist and share that same logic that will point to it being objectively true? So I think it's a great conversation. I think that Frank explained it a lot much better than what I can. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Appreciate you guys.